Hey everyone, welcome back to Masonzero MTG. I'm a big fan of sets like Modern Horizons, but not because of the powerful cards necessarily. No, I much prefer the creative ways that the design team reuses old mechanics and keywords in new ways. So I've come up with a list of 5 keyword abilities that I think could and should make a comeback, even if their current rating on the Storm scale indicates otherwise. And hey, maybe I should just make a cube based on some of these mechanics, instead of asking for them to come back. Surge. One of my favorite ways to play Magic is Two-Headed Giant, mostly because my wife and I used to play a ton of it at pre-releases and I always prefer having my favorite teammate on my side. So of course Surge is a mechanic I want to see come back. This mechanic was only featured in Oath of the Gatewatch, and I incorrectly predicted it would be in Battle Bond, a set literally designed for Two-Headed Giant. This mechanic has an absolute ton of potential, as it was only featured on 11 cards and only in red and blue. I would love to see what Surge could look like in other colors and on multicolored cards. What makes this mechanic good is that it's a cost reduction ability for team games, but still functions when you're on your own since it applies to yourself too. However, it's not the most exciting mechanic ever, but it's great for one of my favorite ways to play. I went ahead and made some cards for my Two-Headed Giant cube that uses the Surge mechanic in other colors, and I think they're designed in a way similar to what we could actually see if the mechanic had spanned all 5 colors. If you want to print these for any reason, I've linked my Imgur album in the description, which contains my Surge cards as well as other custom cards I made for my Two-Headed Giant cube. Anyways, in terms of the Storm scale, Mark Rosewater gave this a 4, and generally said that Surge could make a return in the future. But it's already been 8 years and we still haven't seen it come back, so I am impatiently waiting. Inspired. Inspired is a mechanic only used in Born of the Gods and Journey into Nyx and is only present on 19 cards. It's a pretty simple mechanic and just triggers an ability when the creature with Inspired untaps. I think the problem with this mechanic is that there just weren't any cards that were very good, except maybe for King Makar, seeing some commander play as a weird mono-black commander. The problem with these creatures is that they generally need to attack, survive combat, and then make it to the untap step in order to pay off. So not only do they do nothing when they enter the battlefield, but they also don't do anything on the next turn. It would take a very specific set of other mechanics like Convoke or Springleaf Drum type of effects to make Inspired consistently useful. However, I do think there's a little bit of design space. So far it's only on creatures, but it could be on artifacts, lands, other things like that. Mark Rosewater rated this a 9 on the Storm scale, and that makes it clear that Inspired is a difficult mechanic to design around, make strong, and for players to even remember. But I think it does have more potential. Born of the Gods had some cards that allowed you to tap and untap creatures beyond just combat and the untap step, but I think you'd want to make tapping and untapping more of a set-wide theme in any set that used Inspired, so maybe in the future there will be a place for it. But first, I want to thank LDB Duel for sending me this awesome deck box. They make custom deck boxes, playmats, and more, but what makes them stand out from the competition to me is that they actually employ a graphic designer that can work with you to create your own custom art for your card game accessories. But they also have a lot of pre-made options, like this one that I asked for, with the stained glass mana symbols from Dominaria United. The art printing is high quality both in terms of resolution and color. The deck box itself is a really cool design, where this magnetic cover comes off to reveal 2 removable boxes, one for your deck and another where you can put dice, tokens, or whatever. The build quality seems great, and I'll definitely be using this when I go out to play Commander. You can use my link, which is on screen or in the description, to get 10% off your first order from LDB Duel, and that's going to be ldbduel.com/discount/Masonzero10. Or you can use Masonzero5 to get 5% off any subsequent orders. And if you do use these codes, I'll get a little bit of a kickback for it, so I appreciate that. And I definitely recommend checking them out if you're in the market for a deck box like this, or a playmat, or something like that. Now, back to the video. Provoke. Provoke is another mechanic that is a 9 on the Storm scale, but funny enough, I think it would go alright in a set with Inspired. Do mechanics that are unlikely to return actually make a good set? Should I make this cube? Maybe not, but let's look closer at Provoke. When a creature with Provoke attacks, you can untap an opponent's creature and have it block the creature with Provoke. It's unlikely to return because Fight is a keyworded ability now, but I actually think it's different enough from Fighting that it could be used. Fight is a decent mechanic, but it's actually pretty confusing. Even players who've been playing Magic for a while have to think for a moment about what keywords actually matter in fighting. After all, Death Touch matters, but First Strike does not, even though a lot of people feel like it would. However, since Provoke is combat-based, combat keywords like First Strike will apply. There isn't any confusion, it's not a different mechanic happening. The untap aspect also pairs with Inspired, like I said, and other tap effects, adding an extra level of decision making, as you decide if a creature with a tap ability is worth untapping and triggering in order to force it to block and hopefully die. Existing Provoke creatures are not particularly interesting, but I think modern design could make this mechanic more exciting and varied, and perhaps tie some additional abilities to the mechanic. Conspire. Conspire is a mechanic that exists on instants and sorceries or can be applied to them, and lets you tap 2 creatures that share a color with the spell, then you can copy it and choose new targets for the copy. This mechanic was used on 12 cards in Shadowmoor, but its usage on a Lord of the Rings card and a Doctor Who card recently give me hope that this mechanic could see a return in the near future despite being an 8 on the Storm scale currently. The reasoning seems to be that players had a hard time remembering what it did, although I don't think it's too terribly complicated these days. Design-wise, I think there's quite a bit of space for cool ideas here. It is only applied to instants and sorceries as it stands now, but we have a lot of cards these days that copy permanent spells, and I don't think there's any reason that Conspire could not be put on permanents as well. In terms of mechanics this can go with, Magecraft is the first one that comes to mind, since it cares about copying instant sorceries. A theoretical set that this mechanic exists in would benefit from having tokens in every color or multicolored creatures, and hey, this taps creatures, so why not put Inspired in there too, huh? I'm really fighting for Inspired apparently. Exert. Exert is a mechanic from Amonkhet and Hour of Devastation that was generally pretty good, and I think a lot of people liked it, but it could be made more interesting in a new set, and I'd love to see it return. Essentially how it works is that if a creature has Exert, it attacks, and then you can choose to exert it. And if you do, you trigger an ability, but with the downside of the exerted creature not untapping on your next untap step. Some exert effects were also tied to activated abilities that involve tapping as part of the cost. With only 29 cards having Exert, there is a fair bit of design space here to explore. In general, we got a pretty normal selection of effects like card filtering, combat bonuses, and adding mana, although there is a wide variety of fairly basic effects across these 29 cards. I think you could have a set with even more untap effects, since that is an easy way to get around the downside of Exert, and I think it could be expanded into blue and black pretty easily. The mechanic is only a 5 on the Storm scale, so there is a reasonable chance that it comes back. It has also appeared in some one-off cards for D&D, Lord of the Rings, and Doctor Who more recently, so it's clear that the design team is not finished with this mechanic. So what do you think about these 5 keywords? Should they come back, or should they stay in the dirt where they belong? I'd love to hear what you think. I'd also love to hear which mechanics you're hoping make a comeback after just being a small footnote in a long-forgotten set.